Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, wherever you may be. Today is Sunday, March 21st, and this is Lorelines. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Today, we're talking about the 8th Umbral Calamity for the first, roughly an hour, and then we will be discussing our theories and tinfoil hat shenanigans for Endwalker. Ayumi?
So you may notice a few of those at present are gone. At least their images are. They're running a little bit behind today, or they are preoccupied. So we're going to have just a couple of the members here today, which shouldn't hinder us too much. Why don't we go ahead and start by introducing everyone for those who those who weren't here last week. I'll go first. I'm Ayumi Kogane of the Excalibur server on the Primal Data Center. You may know me as the healer who keeps killing everyone, or the DPS who likes to instigate things and cause chaos. I'm kidding, that's not me. I do like to keep it friendly and keep it entertaining, though. Next, let's have Neela.
Well, hello, I'm Neela. I'm basically just the tinfoil extraordinaire on most days. I like to think things through. I like to extrapolate broadly.
Core?
Fanfic writer, political scientist, flare enthusiast, and general disaster pansexual.
Shadow Meowth.
Hi there, I'm the creator of quirks. I'm a visual rhetoric analyst, scenario writer, and concept artist. And again, as always, I excuse myself for my non-native English shenanigans.
Excused. You also laugh in a very infectious way.
Let's not start this way.
Bonnie.
Hi, I'm Bonnie. I'm an Omni Tank main and a published author. I've been living in Final Fantasy XIV Brainworms for the past 4 months and not getting anything productive done. Hi.
That's a mood.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's move into today's show. We will be starting today with the 8th Umbral Calamity, what all it entailed, how all we averted it, and who all the heroes and villains were. Who would like to go ahead and start? For those that actually don't know much about it, the short stories actually detail in quite depth of what happened, what all went down, what all it entailed through the calamity itself. If you read the short stories, the Unpromised Tomorrow and the World Forsaken short stories, they detail things quite a bit. But where shall we begin? Do you guys wanna help me here?
Maybe we should start by more or less explaining the events that we actually do know of the 8th Umbral Calamity.
Okay. Does anyone want to start before I start hogging the microphone?
If you don't want to.
Go for it.
Go ahead.
Well, the way we find out about the 8th Umbral Calamity is quite an interesting one. When we arrive on the first, Urian J goes on this long explanation of the vision he had on his arrival, or on his passage, rather, to the first. Of course, we find out later that it wasn't actually his vision at all, but the memories of the Crystal Exarch and the knowledge and studies, or whatever, that he'd performed before coming here. So the Crystal Exarch recruits Urian J into his scheme to, I guess, make it more believable. I personally was never quite clear on why we couldn't just say, hey, I'm a dude from the future and I'm here to save you.
Yeah. After you complete the Mountain Gold dungeon, after you defeat Innocence, it actually goes into a small flashback cutscene of Uriandra's discussion with Grahatia and what all was told to him and how he had to keep it a secret from the rest. And Uriandra himself could not believe the amount and the staggering undertaking it took to actually get Graha and the Crystal Tower to the First in order to enact this scheme, in order to save their future. Bonnie, you want to? Sure. Bonnie or Shadow, want to add to this?
Bonnie first.
Silence.
I was replying to Foul. I wasn't paying attention.
It's okay.
There.
And there it
Let
is.
me just go over a bit what Urian J told us.
An undertaking of scarce, credible proportions.
I think his words were like the scare. It was the scarce undertaking. The fact that you were able to pull it off borders on the miraculous.
Well, I mean, it was centuries of work, but yeah.
So
Technically, wasn't in A World Forsaken that it was mentioned that it was 200 years after the Eighth Umbral Calamity that they managed to send the Crystal Tower back in time. And
so that's the interesting thing. Especially for like Umbral Calamity, Umbral eras and Astral eras, they don't have to be just a few years long. They can be hundreds of years long. They are known as eras, so they can be anywhere between just a year long to, with the 8th Umbral Calamity, 8th Umbral Era, 200 years long. They can be quite long. So I'm going to go ahead and start all the way back at the beginning of the 8th Umbral Calamity, what it all had happened. So we know during the game that the alchemical weapon Black Rose was invented and crafted by the Garleans as a means of quote-unquote conquest. It was first, I think it was developed by Gaius. I don't think it was developed by Gaius, but Gaius was the one who actually put it out of commission. But Varus was the one who actually intended to use it as a means of conquering his enemies and advancing the Garleans' agenda forward. Ironically, this Black Rose, the alchemical properties of it, and the elemental aspect of it especially, aligned with that of the element associated with light or stagnation, and it also aligned with the elemental aspect of the First, which is also light or stagnation, as you would call it. So when Emet-Selch was talking to Varus during a cutscene, and he mused to himself, "Now that I think about it, Black Rose may present the perfect aspect. He was not far off from the truth, and that using Black Rose and using the First's similar aspects would create the perfect storm of calamity."
And not just calamity, but a true rejoining.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Who, me?
Yeah, did you have something to say? Or should I continue?
Well, I was just considering that this is kind of a speculation. Well, we're here for speculation, actually.
That's right. Say what's on your mind.
But it's just that when I was reminiscing about Emet-Selch's comment, I was kind of... we've discussed this over times, that we don't know exactly, considering it was a calamity of light, if the Asians miscalculated shit, you know? Because we know that in the First, even the everlasting light is harmful for Emet-Selch, and he's unsundered. So I kind of wonder, even in the tales, there's hardly any mention of Emet-Selch or Ledibus or any other Asian. So I have to wonder, did they have to go into hiding? Did the calamity actually harm them? Did they have to actually wait for the planet to regain or recover for this overflow of stagnation? It's kind of it's kind of an idle thought, you know, but it's something that's always kind of intrigued me.
It's an interesting thought. They might have had to flee to the shards or something like that. Or if it took them unaware, it could have been very bad.
Yeah, it's something I've been wondering too, because we don't really have any indications of any of the Ascians meddling in any fashion post
That
Eighth
said,
Umbral Calamity.
yes. That said, they might just be sitting back waiting for it to blow over so they can do the next. But it does seem interesting.
It
On the
also
one
seems
hand, I
like
thought that, but on the other hand, I was also like, well, Elidibus is always about equilibrium. So
Mhm.
I would have thought that perhaps he would have been involved with trying to, you know, at least balance out some of the bad shit going on.
Yeah, I was wondering like if they had maybe just started to go to work on the other shards while waiting, but that seems like for Atlidibus at least that it was unlikely, like because of that equilibrium element. Like he would probably be very interested in restoring an elemental equilibrium as soon as possible.
So I would
Yeah, it's kind of.
go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I'm just. It's just that it's. I mean, I'm of course not an expert and much less an ASEAN, but uh, I just have to. Uh, I have to wonder if flooding the source, which at the time is still controlled by Heidelin, which is technically, as far as we know, aspected to light and stuff. It's not flooding the source with light, like not just tipping the balance. It's just kind of breaking the balance altogether because the zodiac is in the moon and there's already trouble as Emmett Tolkien himself actually did mention to Varys in 4.4 that if all threatens the equilibrium between dark and light, it falls to you to remove it. Blah blah. Well, that's that thing. Yes. So kind of flooding the source, which is already dominated by light in a sense. It's kind of, I mean, you get what I tried to say, right?
Yes.
It's kind of, maybe it was because they had to they had to rejoin the first at all costs because the alternative was a repeat of the 13th, but at the same time it felt kind of rushed.
There is that, yes, and I'm sure that was a part of it. It's also worth noting that, as long as I recall correctly, the 7th Calamity was aspected to dark. So the 8th Calamity being light would be probably an intent to balance that.
All right.
That
So
might
I have a.
explain.
Go ahead.
That might explain also why they're so quickly close, like temporally together, relative to a lot of the other calamities, which were much more spaced out in time and seem to require more preparation.
Yeah, I have ideas on that too. But go ahead.
I was gonna say, Bahamut64 in chat asked a very good question. Is it clear if the catastrophes in the source happen because of the rejoining, or have to be engineered to happen at the same time as a shard becoming elementally collapsed to cause a rejoining?
I can go on about that a little if you want.
Go ahead.
The Crystal Lux art gives us a nice slideshow, actually, sort of breaking down the mechanics of the calamities, which explains to us that what happens is they begin by elementally aspecting a shard to whatever it is they want to rejoin. They get it overwhelmed by this one singular element or aspect in the case of light and dark. And that, through the ethereal connections to the source, begins to seep into the source and aspect it a little bit that way as well. Then they cause, he called it a singular event, I think. Something causes the barrier to crack, and the entire shard floods in. That singular event seems to be something kicking up out of control, some kind of, like in the case of the fire rejoining, it might have been some wildfire that just raged out of control. But when the rejoining hits, when all that ether returns, that magnifies it manyfold. In the case of the 8th Umbral Calamity, we saw the ethereal thinning, as Coveron mentions. They were playing that up quite a bit in the lead up after the end of Stormblood. And then what happened was the stasis from the first was affecting the source. When Black Rose was released, when it went and raged through the through Eorzea, and I'm not sure exactly how it reached.
Yeah, I was gonna touch on that here in a second, but continue, and then I'll touch on that.
By all means. Yeah, when it raged through Eorzea, the barrier was cracked, the first rejoined, and that sent Black Rose spiraling out of control, essentially.
All right, so I will go ahead and touch on what all happened with Black Rose, how far it spread, what its properties were. So I'm going to go ahead and read a short excerpt from the short story, A World Forsaken. Here goes. Black Rose brought immeasurable destruction to organic life forms, resulting in widespread environmental upheaval. The ambient aether ceased to flow along its normal channels and stagnated, rendering the land barren and uninhabitable. Inevitably, the wild imbalance of natural energies affected neighboring regions and in some cases led to sudden and unpredictable alterations in flora and fauna. Overnight, the crops on which man relied for sustenance became toxic, further increasing the death toll. In the aftermath of those unprecedented disasters, the communities formed by sentient beings fell into disarray, and all forms of societal organization, from small settlements to entire nations, were abandoned as individuals struggled desperately to avoid annihilation. Now, it didn't just fall to the Garleans, it didn't just fall to other nations that were affected. It affected the Garleans as well. In fact, it actually affected their own ceruleum deposits and the machines on which they used to survive. Because the ceruleum failed to activate to kick in, those machines fell silent. So in essence, they doomed themselves as well as the whole world in this.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is like, usually it seems that calamities are focused generally in the region of Eorzea prior to this, but the 8th Umbral Calamity was just like,
It was
can
a
do
world
better.
killer.
Yeah, like it really just seems to have screwed the whole world, which makes me wonder if, our dear Lord of the Underworld may have miscalculated a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I would take a moment to argue the opposite.
Unnecessary flourishes.
Who would accuse him of such a thing? Actually, though, if you consider previous calamities, the elemental calamities, they were pretty world-ending extinction events as a general rule, at least. Obviously, life did survive and continue and go on, and that did as well with the 8th calamity. I think the 7th calamity really makes us lose track of how calamitous, essentially, these calamities are. They're extinguish nations, they extinguish entire ways of life, probably lots of species, etc. The 7th is unusually mild for a calamity.
It really mainly affected that of Altenard, the continent of Altenard, and it didn't go as far as north as Garlemald either. It mainly stayed in Eorzea, and it created the crystal formations and unique structures and formations you see throughout Eorzea today. So it really was more of a localized calamity more than it was a worldwide calamity.
Indeed. Also, obviously we don't know what's going to come of it. In ARR, they did speak a good bit on the corrupted crystals and these formations left behind by the 7th calamity, but we don't know if anything's going to come of that.
Well,
Yeah.
My nail actually turned me onto the theory.
So Bonnie
and I have gone on some field trips.
So Bonnie and I, yes, we have.
Let's hear it.
Go ahead, Bonnie.
So, it started with us looking for pieces of the Ragnarok ships that were basically interlinked to create Dalamud. We decided to go a step further, and instead of just looking at the Burning Wall and, the areas in Lanasia and Korthus and whatever, we decided we were going to actually go into the Binding Coils of Bahamut Unsynced and look around. And which coil was it? Was it 6 or?
Well, I think it was the one with right before. Was it the one with Rafflesia? It was the one. Yeah, it's 6 because Twittania was 5. Yeah.
So I go in on tank because obvious reasons. And I start pulling everything, and I'm like, wait, that crystal has a very intriguing name. One of the, like, those orange crystals that are all through there that you have to break before you actually go fight the flower, they're called dark matter crystals. And they're exactly the same kind of crystal as all of the other orange crystals we see that have been left behind by the 7th Umbral Calamity. So that implies to me that it's basically, spaceship juice that has leaked out and crystallized in the course of the calamity, rather than actually being like necessarily corrupted crystal.
By the way, that's what all the dark matter is whenever you pick it up in your bag. You're housing spaceship juice in your bag.
It powers up your gear, essentially.
Well,
God damn
actually,
it, you made
it's
me
kind
spit my
of
drink.
I can do worse.
it's kind of actually interesting because with dark matter, I don't know if it still works, but it's technically what it was used to repair your gear, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it still is. I think.
So
Yeah, I just did it last.
there's something about dark matter that is kind of at least ether active to repair shit. Which, if it's the case, perhaps dark matter is not just our concept of dark matter. It's just that it's the concentration of, as well, technically it was said that Bahamut's calamity was all elements. It was kind of all overcharged elements and stuff, and that's basically what darkness is. So maybe it's actually what, instead of corrupted crystals, it's just I'm not going to say dark aspected crystals, but maybe it could be also a bit of a stretch calling them creation crystals. I would leave it at reparation crystals.
Right. All right. Would anyone else like to add to this? Sarah? Anything?
I'd
Camila?
like to answer Evelyn's question real quick in
Go ahead.
chat. So Ragnarok is probably a multi-tiered reference, honestly, at this point, because the class of the type of spaceship is a Ragnarok class ship. And as far as we're aware, these ships were being designed and built like before, obviously, Alag fell. So they may have been essentially like arcs or some sort of other ship meant for escaping the coming, calamity or Ragnarok.
All right. If no one else has anything to... Go ahead.
If I may have a point regarding Ragnarok, of course it's the name. I think it's the airship in 8. Yes, but Ragnarok, we have to keep in mind, especially with Endwalker and sites, that Ragnarok is still the name of the end of the world in Norse mythology, and also it's a very if you played Final Fantasy 13, the creature Ragnarok is the combination. Ends up being well, this is kind of spoilers, but ends up being the combination of two of the Lassie, Vanilla, and Fang, and that's how they save Cocoon at first. And also Ragnarok as the creature, the legend of the Lassie, and the creature has mentioning in Latin in its lyrics the Day of Wrath, which is something that's shaping to come in the Walker one way or another. So I would say, of course, that the ship it's as a ship, as an airship, it's a reference to Final Fantasy 8, I would say, but in implications there might be.
I wouldn't say just 8, because there are weapons throughout the Final Fantasy universe that are called Ragnarok. So it could very well have just been used as the name in general.
I just thought of another thing just adjacent to that. If you think about 12 and the way 12 ships are designed,
Yes.
it's like Ifrit class, Bahamut class, and whatever. So
Hmm.
if you think about Ragnarok class as like Ragnarok as a primal, then that kind of falls into some of those ship naming schemes as well.
Hmm.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning perhaps that uh, such ship classes are often named for the original prototype ship made. So they'll build a ship, they'll make a prototype, they'll be like, this is the Ragnarok. And then every other ship using that template is called the Ragnarok class ship, whatever.
Yeah.
And considering what our topic is today, we should probably mention that we speculate that the ship in the Endwalker logo is a Ragnarok class because the designs on its surface are extremely reminiscent of the Ragnarok ship pieces that are scattered throughout Eorzea.
You will find
Yeah,
one in
maybe.
the Corthus Central Highlands. You'll find one at the Burning Wall. We have, you'll find literally the whole thing uh, in the North Shroud, of course, but just various pieces you'll find just kind of, now that A Realm Reborn flying is a thing now, you can do what we do normally now and just take yourself on field trips and just kind of look around, see what you couldn't see before. Like, we didn't know that there was a Ragnarok class spaceship shard in the mountain above, where the what's that red area called in the Central Highlands?
I forget what the red area called, but that general area is called the Nail.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, and the Ragnarok class starship was actually the first thing to fall before Dalamud. It fell away before Dalamud and hit Eorzea right before the red moon fell and opened up and Bahamut came out. Just a little tidbit.
Boulder Downs, that's what it's called.
There we go.
Where, yeah. And that's chock full of Allegan stuff.
So
Yeah.
I would like to go on to this next part here that I will read off. This next part is how the plan to enact Grahatia and get the crystal tower to the first started. The researchers of Garland Ironworks continued to investigate the process by which Black Rose, possessed of destructive power far exceeding its creator's expectations, triggered the Eighth Umbral Calamity. They believed that understanding the nature of this catastrophe could reveal a means by which it might be averted entirely. Their aim was to change the past to create an alternate reality in which the calamity never occurred, a feat rendered conceivable by their knowledge of the advanced technologies of fallen civilizations. Now, by the advanced technologies of fallen civilizations, they refer to Alexander and Omega, the battles with them. However, many of those who would bear the burden of continued existence in a world ravaged by Black Rose failed to see this as a viable stratagem. So there's the interesting point there. Our battles with Alexander and Omega are actually shown as moments in time in the dungeon, the twinning. At the very end, you will see Biggs and Wedge frozen in time at the raid of the Coil of Bahamut. You will see the Crystal Tower frozen in time. You will also see them frozen in time on the deck of Omega, and also during Alexander. They needed the ability or the means of which to travel the rift, and they needed the means of which to travel time and space. Both of these primals together had the means and the knowledge and ability to do just that. Using both of those primals' knowledge and what was detailed in the reports left behind, they were able to reconstruct a similar primal version of Alexander with both abilities of Omega and Alexander itself. Anyone else like to add?
It's kind of interesting, if I may.
Go ahead.
It's kind of interesting that they, of course, had to resort to Omega. Of course, they resorted to Omega because the the issue that sparked the rejoining was in the first, so they have to travel the rift. But at the same time, I find it interesting that maybe Omega was the reason that allowed this division in timelines, because Alexander, if you recall the raid, the Alexander questline is about a closed circle of time, and time is everything that's happened is already done. That's the point of Alexander. Yeah, like in the end when Mead and her lover actually appear in the past, and they become the progenitors of the Hotco tribe and stuff. Everything that's happened has already happened. But Omega is both a rift space bending creature that also is not also comes from another star. So I can see why Omega could break Alexander's time closed circle of time. You know what I mean? Perhaps that's why they also needed Omega, not just to travel to the first, but to break the continuity of time.
Anyone else like to add? Core, Neela, Bonnie?
I just had a very interesting thought based on what Meowth was saying there. I've just suddenly wondered, why didn't they simply travel through time and prevent the distribution of Black Rose? Like, on the one hand, yes, it's a story. We wanted to go to the first. They needed a reason to send us to the first, but that seems like it would be way easier.
It's true.
It's possible that the Garland folks, Garland Ironworks folks, did the sort of thing that I always end up doing: get invested in a really good idea, and then they can't even see the possibility of an easier solution. But it is very interesting.
I like this idea. Go with it. No other ideas work. Let's roll.
It's easy to get fixated on stuff. It really is. And the fact of the matter is, it's allowed for a lot more than just preventing the eighth rejoining. Because again, I've pointed out before that whatever the next rejoining would have been, we're going to call it the eighth rejoining. The next time it happens, you can prevent 10 of them, and then the 11th one gets through, and that's the eighth rejoining.
Yeah.
But it is interesting, and it does make me wonder if the Asians would have been able to prevent that somehow. Like, maybe there's another timeline where they tried that, and maybe it worked, maybe it didn't.
It's interesting too, because when we get the flashback of Graha and Biggs in Manor Fortemps, he's like, no, it would have to be later, after the liberation of Alamigo, perhaps, which implies that they have this idea of when they would need to pull the Warrior of Light from, but it just seems really strange. Like, unless they had figured out some way to measure the growing and shrinking of time between the first and the source, like, that's literally the only thing I can think of at this point for why they would have wanted a specific point in time to pull us from.
Yeah, obviously it needed to be before we died, but on the other side, they could have pulled us much earlier.
But it's during the reminiscing scene instance in 5.3 with Elidibus. When he does mention that the War of Light's power had grown beyond their control, is in Stormblood. So also, there's true that technically it's after 4.0 that we actually meet Omega and deal with the whole Omega stuff.
True. If we there to deal with Omega, then they can't use Omega in their plans because it hasn't been defeated.
Yep.
In fact, the conclusion of the Omega questline is 4.4, which is when the call to the first is first issued by Graha. So it's kind of I don't know if it means anything. It's actually
Probably does.
Probably, yeah.
Very likely.
Calculated.
Yeah.
This is why you don't give your cats calculators, people.
More keyboards. Number 2. Core.
crap.
I interpreted that whole line of exchange with them rereading Edmont's account of the Dragon Song War as essentially they wanted to try and gather us at a very specific moment in time, both in our power, but also potentially in their ability to manipulate events to actually gather us up, not anticipating that they would have those trial and error moments that Graha had before he was able to actually grab us. And
That's a
that
good point.
time travel and timey-wimey shenanigans and rift travel and everything is just very much not an exact science for anyone, not the Asians, not for the people who were able to send Graha over, that perhaps not even for Alexander or Omega. Like, it's very much like an open box where anything can happen.
Is this when we want to dive into all of the problems that come with time travel that were set up in Alexander?
Yes.
Doesn't seem
Seems
to
like a
have been
perfect
brought
time.
up yet.
Like how Yastola was like during one of those cutscenes when they actually managed to get a hold of like figuring out what Mead's story is and everything, and they're like, Alexander's a time traveling primal, and isn't that kind of like really bad in a lot of ways? Like, you can't actually go back into the past to fix your problems, can you? And then that's exactly what Grahatia and company do.
So
Yeah, an extremely short and dirty version for anyone who doesn't quite remember is essentially Alexander being a computerized primal, if you want to look at it that way. Logic looped itself into realizing that its own existence was a threat and continuously went through time to make sure it could manipulate its own demise so that it didn't exist anymore. Because time paradoxes.
Time paradoxes.
Maybe the Calamity was doing the same thing, although it's not actually sentient.
Right.
Unless smiley face.
If I may,
Go ahead.
Of course, I have to say, for anyone who has played the whole Final Fantasy XIII trilogy, the whole time paradox stuff is, it's enough to trigger many alarms. And of course, I've discussed the implications of the butterfly effect and stuff with the crew here, but it's kind of the butterfly effect. It's when any minor change can end up triggering a bigger change.
It ripples out, yeah.
And at the same time, it's almost as if sometimes there's this theme that if you try to prevent something, the laws of the universe are going to try to make that thing happen in another way, and probably each time it's going to be more brutal to quell the contradiction in the already written timeline.
So I would also like to add to that, Meow, too, that also coincides with your point, too. So here's an excerpt from The Unpromised Tomorrow, which also plays into the butterfly theory effect. We could also only assume that Grahatia's mission would carry across the rift and that we would play our part to its completion. Yet, with our duty done, I could not help but feel a part of me was missing, much like the crystal tower from the skyline of Mordona. I told myself that the void would soon be filled with the sense of accomplishment, but I wasn't sure I believed it. For 200 years we had toiled and struggled, and our efforts have been met with not but thunderous applause, but the languid lapping of the lake. In the end, it was one of my companions who gave voice to the question of all of our minds. Will we be disappearing too, then? See, that, in my mind, kind of raises the question, so when you do create that alternate universe, does it affect the one that you've already started? Or does it fork off, and then you just go with the one that is forked off?
I would actually... Sorry.
Go ahead.
I think that the way that they've presented it with the short stories especially, but also with our Graha now, like not disappearing initially, the X-Arc, so that he could, I guess, augment the Graha we have right this second, that they did continue on in their own directions, that the 8th Umbral Calamity timeline is continuing on, potentially with active assistance from Midgard Sormer in that timeline, and our timeline is continuing on with our own version of what we would maybe call hope.
I can see that argument, but I look back at Alexander and I'm like, I feel like that's our example for this is how time nonsense works. They could be saying, here's one example, here's another example, they're different. But I'm still suspicious personally.
Yeah, I'm definitely suspicious. I still, and tinfoil hat on here, I still kind of expect that the 8th Umbral Calamity hasn't been averted. And it may not even be that it's about
Kind of like
to
a Band-Aid.
be replaced. Maybe, like, there's enough off with Urianger's account, which we can't even consider reliable currently, that I'm just like, something is off here.
We're playing an Otome game and we're going for the good ending, but we got the okay ending instead.
Yeah, basically.
Actually, I have to question. What one has to question when I mentioned, the thing that this is the thing when the universe, all means possible, try to suppress the singularity of the stuff that's actually contradictory. If in the proper timeline the 8th Umbral Calamity exists, and there was no branching timeline, because in a sense in the Alexander questline we are told that's anti-natural, as usually time paradoxes tend to be. One has to wonder. For example, right now, if we're stepping up a foot in Endwalker speculation, maybe through or just because knowing of this is the trigger of the new final days, because if there's obliteration, it's obliteration for the source, for the shards, and the paradox, and the time paradox. So this could be a way for the universe to reset properly. You get what I mean? And it's all because of the butterfly effect. We in this hypothesis, we wouldn't know if, for example, Daniel and the Telfor are doing it consciously or it's just a consequence. That's just tinfoil hat, okay? It's just a speculation. That's just the idea of the 8th Umbral Calamity being prevented through a time paradox also means the universe may try to kill the Warrior of Light, because that's what happened in the proper timeline. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Absolutely.
I have to wonder why something like this didn't happen earlier with the sound in the final days.
At the same time, I have to wonder, now that you mention it, proper timeline, Cobra mentioned that Emmett Silk and Elizabeth are still alive. Maybe the universe is trying to correct the time paradox too, because they both died in the first. Just saying.
It is an interesting point. And I think someone mentioned, I forget exactly which of you guys it was, mentioned that in some ways this resurgence of the final days could be filling the role left empty by the 8th Calamity.
Yeah, I think a couple of us have posed that. I mean,
it does make a certain degree of
went
sense.
on a tangent earlier this week.
We have
some fun.
We've gone on a tangent.
You say that like we're ever not on tangents.
Well, you guys are dialed up to 11. I'm usually on 8, just kind of bouncing back and forth between like 3 discords at once, so I can't like go full in.
You should
I'm gonna.
stop that.
No, not at all. I am my own person. You don't pay my sub. Continuing. In addition to presenting their plan as an attempt to save the Warrior of Light rather than a bid to rewrite history, they were able to gain the support from survivors of many different species and subgroups. Representatives from various settlements came to donate resources and foodstuffs to Garland Ironworks, despite possessing barely enough food to sustain themselves. Many of them were also acquainted with the Warrior of Light, some even claiming to have beneficiaries of the late hero's acts of philanthropy. Here's a funny one. A semi-aquatic creature known as a Namazu, who had arrived bearing donations, imparted information apparently gleaned from premonitory dreams. The following is an extract of his recorded testimony. The world was never in such a ruinous state in the vision sent to me by the Big One. No. Seigetsu the Enlightened said the future I witnessed was part of another history, a different chain of events where no 8th Umbral Calamity at all, whatever that means. Seigetsu is a fortune teller, confirmed.
And that's interesting, though, because that could be taken... You could potentially interpret that to mean that the Warrior of Light was never supposed to die, and that was things going awry. I'm sure that's where the Exarch's comment about being the sacred adjudicator of the timeline comes from.
Yes, but if that were the case, which is the that's how do you say it? Which is the catalyst for in the timeline we know that what is the point in which things went wrong in the timeline we know, instead of let's say that actually there was the correction of the timeline in Shadow Burst with the whole traveling to the first. Then what exactly is what caused that? That's my
Meow.
Say hi
Sure
to
that's
the
not
cat.
you?
Yeah. What's the moment of in our timeline that caused this difference when the Warrior of Light shouldn't have died but instead died?
Jokingly, the Sundering.
Well,
Half jokingly.
It's actually true, but
Indeed.
I feel that there should be something else that probably right now we wouldn't even think of it, but in Endwalker it's probably going to be that last piece that everything falls into piece. It's redundant. After we know that particular fact, there's going to be a lot that everything will make sense. But still, until then, it's frustrating as hell.
Indeed.
Like Cobron just mentioned in chat, to some extent it does seem that Elidibus has the script, so to speak, for the game.
Sorry.
Sounds like Kitty has a point to make.
Exactly.
Feed me!
So we know that I'm just going to go over another one here. So this is accounting from Omega's point of view, of course. I reviewed the reports made by Ironworks members following their investigations into the Crystal Tower and the mechanical primal known as Alexander and the interdimensional rift, the findings of which were instrumental in formulating the plan to alter the past. Thus did I discover that each of these missions had one common element. They ended with a key figure entering a form of self-imposed exile, not unlike deep slumber. As times such as these, when one is to be separated from one's companions, whether it was by sleep or by death, there is a phrase which I have found particularly fitting: good night. So, Alexander didn't quite know of Graha yet, but he knew of an individual of whom they spoke of, not by name, but instead by an individual who was mentioned and referenced throughout multiple works of the Ironworks and referenced as to kind of like the key figure in enacting their plans and causing it to go forward. Would anyone like to add to this? No? Not even the cat?
It's kind of complicated. Right now, it seems like we're treading upon very unstable ground to make proper statements. So it's kind of
well.
That's why I say it's frustrating. But still, I mean, it's frustrating. It's frustrating in the sense that everything sounds like tinfoil hat theories.
Well, I also have a few things that I took pictures of that I'm gonna go bring up here too, that was referenced clear back in the Crystal Tower storyline. So let me find them here. And this one. So in the World of Darkness storyline, right before you leave, Grahatia gets a kind of like a premonition or a kind of voice in his head ringing out and says, "May the Crystal Tower again be a beacon of hope for mankind." And then later on, right before he decides to go into his self-imposed state of exile, he says, "I could not have asked for a better comrade. If only I have been a part of your adventures for longer. Alas, fate dictates I have a different role to play. A wish hidden for millennia and brought to light by the good people of Noah." Foreboding stuff, but I'm going to keep going here. And right, the final scene where you see him as the doors close, last thing he says, "The future is where my destiny awaits."
Well, he says the same thing during 5.0. We find him in that.
But this was during the Crystal Tower storyline. This was all the way back 2.5.
Foreshadowed
4.
long ago, yeah.
5-ish, yeah.
This was back in 2.4. You have to wonder whether this was planned all the way back then to tie in or not. But that's probably like Banana said in chat, this is probably Ishikawa's writing, just kind of arcing all the way into the future here.
Tying the circle of time, essentially.
Yeah, just to touch on like storytelling stuff really briefly. One of the best, in my opinion, techniques to use when writing a story, especially something so long form, is as you're going to pepper just a bunch of loose dangling threads. They may not seem like much to the readers or the players at the time where they first see those threads, but they're things that you can reach back and pull forward as you need them as the story continues.
The way to weave your narrative together, even if it's separated by time, etc.
There's a lot. I think I don't know if we've talked about that in live, but certainly we have discussed how Eorzea, other stuff is, when it comes to Alag, is literally littered with sun symbols, and well, knowing certain things, it's kind of, you have to stop and I actually stopped more than once and make a double take, like, wait, what? Like, for example, the example I have most seared in my mind is going through, in one of my altars, going through Thanalan, and I don't remember, I was searching for in the early quests, and I checked the map because I have a terrible sense of direction, and I read the minor road, that's the minor road that is the Royal Elegant Starway, and the main road that is the Royal Elegant Sunway, and I was like, wait, what?
Sun this, sun that. There's so many sun themes. Like last night, my random thought of, I wonder if the solar is about to come back into use in Rising Stones. And then
there she goes.
Like, wait, the solar.
When I
Hold up.
noticed the other day was the music. I had my Final Fantasy music playlist on. That's one of my favorite things about this game. Total aside, but I adore the music, the composition. And so a song called "To the Sun" comes on, and I'm just like, that's the Thanalan area music. What's going on here? been one of my favorite themes since I started. I'm just a little baby running around outside the city states, and I'm like, oh, this music's so good.
So
I think there's a fair amount of like serendipity in the storytelling here, but definitely I think they also planned a lot of this out in advance, maybe even all the way back into 1.0. And Realm Reborn has allowed for a lot of the storytelling to like organically grow with time to suit that theme.
They've
And
set themselves up with a very broad world creation, which gives them lots of puzzle pieces to play with.
Yeah, and it helps too that Koji has been part of 14 since 1.0. So he's kind of been there to like bridge that transition in the story in a lot of ways.
At the same time, one has to wonder to what extent it's got tire backwards writing, to what extent they had some plans, because at the same because their choice for the Asian named after the Science of Light of Final Fantasy 12 lore, that immediately puts the Asians in the zodiac, not zodiac, the zodiac symbolism, and with zodiac symbolism comes, of course, the sun, because you know, how it goes. So one has to wonder to what extent they've been planning this stuff, and it's not just tying loose ends, you know. I think I actually discussed this thing with you, Bonnie, I think a couple months ago, but yes, it's hard to tell. Would be nice if one day we could bring one of the lore developers into a guest a guest interview, but
Yeah, we're
Pepper
doing
them
a
with all our
written
crazy
interview.
theories.
So I would also like to delve further into kind of like what all the properties of Black Rose and also what Oriandra's account went into. So this goes into his little aetherology kind of speech that he gave you in Ilmeg. So I'm going to go ahead and read the passage. Seeking to prevent this future from coming to pass, Oriandra delved into a 3-year study of aetherology during his stay in the First. Oriandra finds that the source's understanding of active ether, known as astral, and static ether, known as umbral, is the reverse of what the people of the First believe, as the color white is produced by the absence of other colors. The First came to call static ether light, while the color black is produced by the absorption of all colors, so they call the active ether darkness. He and Thancred mused that while the source is named after their active and static ethers after their effect, the First named them after their generation, and that the First interpretation may be the correct one. With this new information, Oriandra deduces that since Black Rose operates by bringing its victim's ether to a standstill, it must have a strong affinity with static or light ether. Having uncovered the process of the Umbral Calamity, Oriandra explains that the First reaches true stasis, the flood of light will begin leaking light ether to the source. He concludes that in the future, the Empire's use of the Black Rose coincided with the First being completely consumed by light and rejoining with the source. This unleashed a massive amount of light ether on the source, resulting in Black Rose's unexpected potency and causing the 8th Umbral Calamity. Bonnie or anyone else, would you like to add to this?
Yeah. So Urianger and his secrets, goddammit.
He hides a lot.
Yeah, he does. So I have a couple thoughts regarding Urianger from Shadowbringers overall, honestly, that we should probably discuss, because
Go ahead.
one, what he tells us in the Bookman's shelves about the 8th Umbral Calamity is the account that Graha gave him when they were, planning their mad scheme to dupe the Warrior of Light. I don't know that I necessarily believe the account. Not necessarily because I think either of them are intentionally lying to us, but more so because stories change with the passage of time. Even Graha's account of the 8th Umbral Calamity isn't a first-hand account. It's centuries after the fact. And the way they describe the calamity doesn't strike me at all as a light-based calamity. They talk about the world continuing to burn. They show us Rogger's Reach, where it appears to have fire or red ether or something going on. And a lot of the pieces just don't line up to me.
Think of the final days, the impending final days that we have now.
Yeah, exactly. And one of my main points with thinking that the telling of the eighth Umbral Calamity might be incorrect is quite simply when they say that the world is burning, if they mean that the world is literally burning, that goes against what we know of the polarity of stasis. Because in Eden, when you're first doing, like the first, 6 or so floors, you can't even have a campfire in the empty because everything has been shifted so far towards stasis that fire doesn't ignite. None of the prerequisites are there for fire to even work.
Now that makes me think of something interesting mentioned before. Sorry, my brain's trying to go blank on me. Mentioned before how some people wonder if the Ascians might have themselves been killed, rendered stasis, or damaged by the light of the Eighth Umbral Calamity. What days happen when the Ascians all die? Or at least the Unsundered.
They return to the
Daniel
rift.
2.0.
Major tinfoil, of course.
Yeah.
Maybe they couldn't return.
Oh look, Cobron said my quote in chat. Whatever will I do?
Another note about the eighth Umbral Calamity and light and stasis real quick is, I don't know about y'all, but I don't feel like we have hard confirmation that the thinning of the ether on the source is 100% tied to what was going on in the first. Like, they put a lot of emphasis on, Matoya was having trouble with the thinning of ether. We see what's happening out in the burn and all this other stuff going on. And sure, they imply that thinning of the ether, as they called it, was because of all of the light flowing from the first to the source in preparation for the eighth Umbral Calamity. But I kind of wonder if, in fact, it's actually tied closer to either what Fandaniel is up to, the sound potentially trying to reawaken, or like Heidelin or something like draining more ether from the land. Because the phenomenon also reminds me of how they talk about primals draining ether from the land and weakening the planet.
Indeed. Now you have me wondering if the ethereal thinning could possibly be due to Heidelin's decline.
Yeah, Cobron did just say ethereal thinning has actually been going on since 2.5.
Yes.
So
that was the thing that got me thinking along that lines. Well, obviously 2.0 itself was when, I have not the strength to shield thee again, etc.
Yeah, true. It could have just been accelerated by the light coming in from the first.
And then when they point out all of the ethereal thinning later on, closer to Shadowbringers, it's just conveniently tied next to the narrative of they're setting up the rejoining, whereas maybe that thinning is actually, as you say, more in line with perhaps something else going on.
From a narrative perspective, it would be a big reversal to pull. Not to say they wouldn't. I'm not convinced, but I am looking with interest. But it would be very, very clever for them to be like, yes, well, logically we assume this. Well, the characters are not always right.
In a sense, it would make, picture that, for example, it's not the light, but it's something else that caused. We could still have the first rather than light, but the flood was kind of still prevented. Let's just imagine for a moment that something I'm not saying the final days, because I think that has a different a proper final days, but a different sort of sound-related calamity triggered by the Black Rose or else, do you think the source inhabitants would even dare to imagine what actually the thing what's actually happened? Of course not. They as they always say, they see the towers. It's Garlean.
I hate that.
You know what?
I hate that so much. I'm looking at one of those
I
towers
hate
right now, and
that.
that thing does not look like.
Man, that's evil. It must be Garlean.
Yeah.
Now I'm really
The
sad
highest
that you
show in
can't.
Merlin. It's not that one.
sad that
It's-
Ayumi can't pull up the meme I made.
I know.
just
I
used it.
know. It's
I'm gonna have to put
literally
it
all of the
separately.
alliance leaders. They're all the time. They see something bad. They see something evil because they don't know enough about Ascians. They instantly go to, oh, it's Garlean.
Yes, but and
It's a Garlean design.
that's exactly, yeah, of course, Garlean is absolute. So that's what I think. If the calamity or the catastrophe has another, for example, is related to the sound, do you think the people of the source, especially the Ursians, would even post the thing? It has a different source, redundant, than Garlemald or the Asians? Of course not. They're going to think, no, this is the Asians triggering the eighth Umbral Calamity. This is the Garleans using chemical weapons. Blah blah blah. I mean, it's not entirely wrong, but at the same time, we know how things.
I think they look Maki as well, Banana. And the reason being is because like Bonnie and I do, we take field trips. We try and look up our source material. So I went through the Void Arc and I went through the Weeping City, and I went through Dunscaith, and I looked at all three different architecture. So far, the Void Arc is the only type of architecture that closely resembles that of the tower and of the trailer where Fandaniel is speaking or is going up to Xenos itself. Is the
Can we
only one.
explain the difference between the architecture design and the
Because there's
Corruption.
multiple ones.
I was going to bring that up.
Yeah.
Well,
go
the
ahead.
No,
Void
I
was
mean-
corrupted, right?
And
Corrupted by the Void Scent.
We could use this thing to bridge to Endwalker speculation if you.
Yeah, let's go ahead and bridge that because we said that we'd be talking about it for an hour and we're over the hour, but yeah, we'll go ahead and bridge it over.
So, who wants to explain the difference regarding the architecture?
Oh, boy.
Well, you guys want to prove me wrong about the fifth Umbral Calamity so much. Why don't you guys do that?
I mean,
It's because we love you.
Right.
I mean,
You guys
just
want to
touch
destroy
on the
my things on the
architecture-
not the Warring Tribe, but the War of the Magi and everything. Go ahead. I'll just go
to
on mute.
touch on the architecture and the ooey gooey bio bits on it. So, we've seen a couple different examples of Maki architecture. We see in Dunscaith, or however the hell you say that name.
No, you're correct.
It's
Okay.
that's fine.
I don't think it's that.
I don't think it's that either, but we'll go with it. Most people
No,
do.
I'm just gonna watch from now.
So there, the architecture is vaguely Victorian. I like to call it evil eye goth punk sometimes just because some of the designs we see in there. But the architecture there is significantly less corrupted than what we see in Void Arc. What we see in Void Arc is significantly more similar to Fandaniel's elevator and crazy tower in the Endwalker trailer. Now, what those biological bits are on the architecture is essentially astrally corrupted terrain, if you want to think about it that way. And the presence of a fuckload of astral ether from the Void Scent basically coats everything in all of that biological mess.
Astrally corrupted Garlean design. Thanks.
Ska.
Kabaran, I will smack you.
This is the opposite of what you're doing. You're crying first and you're laughing later. There we go.
We got there.
Someone keeping count in chat? It was an eventual thing.
Sorry, I've been kind of restraining myself for like a minute.
Sure.
Sorry, it's just I'm sorry. It's just when Bonnie mentioned the Van Daniels elevator, I just got in my mind the EBDB meme with the elevator. Sorry.
It's a good game.
Yeah,
Maybe
you deserve
that's
a rock.
why it's not Endbringers and it's Endwalkers instead. Because if it was Endbringers, then our acronym for the expansion would literally be EV.
Instead
Oh
of
my
EW,
God.
you.
I want it. Give it to me. Give it to me.
There
Maybe we
she
could still
goes.
have it be Endbringers at some point.
I have the ability to mute you, you know.
Sorry. No, we were discussing Voidsent and the influence of Voidsent in the
The
architecture.
three architectures, yes. Now we've gone over one, we've gone over the Void Ark, now we're going over Weeping City, right?
Yes, but there's a difference. Technically, there's. I would like to point out that we call Voidsent because, well, Void being the 13th and all, the transformation, it's technically it's hard in the first. That's to create a portal to the 13th and summon Voidsent. That's why they needed two mages to do it. Technically, it's because the first is farther than the source is to the 13th. Kind of. There's also the fact that, of course, the first is just a shard. But at the same time, the quest line, those who have played the tank role quest and have gone through the Vovert and Brandon's story, there's the plague of Vovert, and we later in 5.1 we learned that it was not them, but it was MacLeod's soulcraft, and that's their discipline, how it's actually called. What allowed the court mage of Bovert to unleash the plague that actually transformed people into what we call voids. So it's actually not darkness; it's soulcraft. So if we take this, then we would understand that the Voidsent, actually the Void Ark, was powered by the souls of the Voidsent, and that's why the architecture looks this way, this organic way. It's because I think it was I don't know if it was mentioned in other, but we do know that the power of souls affects the architecture. We have this in the Void Ark because it's been going like a millennium around. I don't know. With all those Voidsents running rampant and stuff. Well, the Weeping City of Mac, we see some parts of Mac that are uncorrupted, but then we step into the pyramid, and the architecture changes as we see that the pyramid is also home to many of these containers for voids and stuff. And Dan's Cave is the only place that's purely uncorrupted because only recently in
Uh-oh, we lost her.
We've lost her.
Oh no.
Okay, so picking back up to where she was last going off. I don't think we're recovering from that because she was off on a tangent. So, Bonnie, do you want to go into actually because
More
we were?
prominently.
Oh, never mind. She's back. Are you
Where is
back?
she?
Yes. So, Red lost me, please. What was?
I don't know actually.
Same.
Dunescape.
Okay.
We're talking
yeah,
about Dunescape being the only
Dunescape,
uncorrupted
yeah.
location.
Yes.
So it actually is corrupted. It's just significantly newer.
Yes.
When Iomi and I went through there recently, I lingered behind the pack like a baddie and took screenshots. And there is a light film of that biological whatever the fuck on the walls of those buildings in the early part of the dungeon.
Interesting.
Dead noise. So let's go into the. We recently picked apart the Endwalker lyrics too, haven't we? That they released that. They released that video of the clean audio. So how far are we along on that?
I mean, we have some pretty decent guesses, but our brains were so fried after that one night that we haven't really revisited too terribly much. Is there some stuff, like there's some lines that I'm pretty confident that
Through
I
our
heard
echoes,
correctly.
the angels reign.
Yeah, through our
That's a good
echoes,
one.
the angels reign. I'm pretty sure that's one, but a lot of the rest of it is not.
It's
clear
very
enough to
distorted.
debate. Yeah. Because it also sounds like they did what they did with the first Shadowbringers teaser. I don't know if anyone remembers, but the very first Shadowbringers teaser, if you listen to it, you can tell that the vocalist on that one is not the same vocalist as the final version. In addition to being distorted and lyrics being out of place. So we can assume that they've done much the same with the Endwalker teaser. So I'm currently expecting that various sentences and or phrases have been jumbled and that it was probably like Soken or someone who sung the lyrics for the teaser version. So I'm not confident in speculating about the lyrics currently.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we're not speculating about the lyrics, then where else might we touch on? I know that we touched on earlier about the Endwalker logo being the kind of like the Allegan craft, the Ragnarok class Allegan craft. What are our theories on how 5.5 is going to transition into 6.0? Do we want to start talking about like our lunar cry theory or?
That could be a good place to start, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, probably.
I'm definitely hoping for a really big, everything's shattered, everything's unstable, major upheaval going into 6.0 because I would find that very interesting.
Oh, I just remembered, I did have a comment that kind of ties into what we were just talking about with Mock, but also like Soulcraft, Void Scent, Sound Beasts, which really quickly, I'm wondering if we may be looking at a situation where technically all souls may be minorly corrupted by the sound currently, because there's so many overlapping themes visually with Void Scent, Terminus Beasts, and anything related to Soulcraft. It just looks so corrupted.
Yeah, very much tinfoil here, but it seems odd to me that aspect a soul too much towards darkness and it turns into like a gargoylish nightmare Void Scent. Aspect it too much towards light and turns into a light scary Void Scent that's called a Sin Eater.
Yeah,
I would love to know if that is somehow written into the soul and it somehow comes out when it goes too far out of balance, like, or is it just random? I feel like it can't be random.
You just
but
turn
I don't
into a
really know.
bayonet enemy.
Exactly. It seems really interesting to me that seems to be, if your soul gets too far out of balance, this goes awry. Also, seeing things like the Vobert court magician doing things like that to people as well.
And one of the things that makes me think about that is in what is it? I think it's in Mount Golg. There's the tentacle lady sin eater monsters as trash that have Callista Fairy's overall model.
Are you thinking of? I think you're thinking
You're
of the
thinking of
one.
Amarant, yeah.
So
The
no.
terminus creatures
So
in
there's actually light sin eater versions
Oh,
in
Angel.
Mount Golg, and then we get terminus beast ones in Amarot.
Remember those in that
No.
interesting.
The tentacle lady. You mean the one that's Caliphysauri's model?
Yeah, there's a dark one, and then there's a sin eater one.
No. There's not. There. I think there's no senator one. It's just Caliphysauri, and there's the only mob in Amarot that is the Terminus Idolizer.
I'll go find my screenshot of it. I've looked at it through things that shall not be
Probably,
named.
I think you may be thinking of the Forgiven of Sanity, the last boss of Mount Gold. No?
I'll find
It's
the
just
screenshot. Y'all go ahead.
Okay.
Trust me, Bonnie will have the things.
So yeah.
So I will go ahead and just kind of go with my theory that I presented to them a while back. They thought it was cool, but probably still on the back burner right now because, well, it's used in Final Fantasy VIII. Why would they bring it up here? Why wouldn't they? It has to do with the moon anyways. So we saw that the towers are there for Fandaniel to cause chaos. He said that it'll give rise to the grandest of spectacles. So they're pointing upwards, which are similar to how the Lunanic Pandemonium work with the Lunar Cry from Final Fantasy VIII, in which the Lunar Cry brought down monsters from the moon to descend upon the world and cause chaos and destruction. Now, we also see a hole in the moon or that could be a hole in the moon. We still don't know. The art doesn't let us know right away. But for all we know, this could be a hole in the moon. So we'll go with that for right now with our Lunar Cry theory. So we're witnessing monsters coming out of the moon, a chunk of the entire moon coming out with monsters is pouring down onto Hydaelyn, we'll say. And now we have a rampant influx of so many terminus beasts that were, we'll say, locked inside. Perhaps they were locked inside. I have a tinfoil hat on right now. That's a good theory, Bahamut. Yeah. So we could probably be looking at numerous monsters, numerous beasts that were sealed within the moon due to what Hydaelyn did. Hydaelyn and Zodiark's fight. And Fandaniel is just saying, okay, well, time to unleash the beasts. Open the door. And they just kind of pour down onto Hydaelyn and such the Lunar Cry, which of course was the same way with the Lunanic Pandora Towers and the moon, worked the same way. Anyone else like to add?
It's just there's so many ways this could go down. I'm reluctant to debunk anything because at this stage it's really hard to say. I'm actually not that into knowing how everything's going to go to hell. That's actually I'm fine either way. What actually intrigues me is how are we going to well, come up with a solution, as to say.
A solution to the disaster itself.
Then you first must see the end.
That's
Yes and no at the same time. I mean, of course, we need to find a way to stop this, but as things are now, we lack the knowledge. So,
Well, that's just if I may jump off of that. The line I quoted was somewhat flippant from the lyrics of To the Edge, but I think there's a lot to it. To begin, we first must see the end. Endwalker.
Mm-hmm.
We are seeing the
Yes.
final days, the terminus, which is Latin for end, creatures, and so forth. I do suspect that we could not remedy the sound without seeing what its deal is, without learning what it is, its truest nature. And Fandaniel has offered us a perfect opportunity to do just that. So thoughtful
How
of him.
nice
Really.
of him.
I love him.
What a nice guy.
What a bang up fellow.
No, but there's actually another point, because not even the ancients could that we know ever that we know, of course, at least before summoning Zodiac, they apparently, from what the shades tell us, they had no idea what the sound was. They only knew that it was a keening sound from beneath the earth, and that's when that stripped the ancients from the it kind of forced the ancients to manifest their fears and subconscious, essentially, with their creation magics. But at the same time, I have to wonder how many terminus beasts are the result of creation magic, and how many beasts and which could be the manifestation of the sound itself. Like I'm thinking in Therion, the final boss of Amarant. Its title, its epithet is the Tonic Riddle. Tonic is a Greek term. It means from beneath the earth, but it's used to define. In Greek, actually, it refers to the underworld, and as in the Greek underworld of mythology. So that's another thing that I've also discussed with the crew many times, that the sound may be an illness or something attacking directly the live stream, or the underworld, as the ancients call it. And Therion, having that epithet, is kind of not confirming but supporting this theory. And if, well, you know how it goes.
Yes.
You made me realize something very interesting just there. I mentioned before how the Ironworks fixated on their solution and didn't look at other solutions. That reminded me, there's a line in 5.3 where the Warrior of Light can actually ask Graha, what, you didn't consider anything else? And he acts very surprised if you choose that one. Of course I did.
Yes.
The ancients also fixated on their solution, on Zodiark. They didn't consider other ways after they had... I mean, we don't know exactly how it went down, but we are given to understand the Warrior of Light, the Azim left, was like, hey, I can't do this solution, we need another way. But they remain fixated on their solution, same as the Ironworks folks.
That's true.
It feels like everybody has a solution that they fixate on.
Yeah, I feel like it's an intentional parallel, the Ironworks people doing a similar... again, not that the solution is bad, per se, in their case, or we don't know yet. It hasn't played out, if so. But a solution that could maybe have been done another way, the same way the ancients. I hope that with the resurgence of the final days, we get to figure out an actual end to this cycle, to this pain and chaos.
That's actually true. We're, as we know, those who don't know their past are bound to repeat the same mistakes of their predecessors. And the Ironworks, even though they have a lot of knowledge, they still didn't know in Graha's timeline anything about the ancients. So yes, they lack this knowledge. So it's very possible that they made the same mistakes. This, of course, would lead to the same end.
So, let's see. What other points haven't we touched on yet? We touched on the lunar cry theory, which we're slowly kind of losing to other theories now.
We have a lot of theories.
We have a lot. There's a lot.
There's honestly a lot of things they could do, really. So it's only natural for there to be a lot of theories.
What? Let's go with, actually, I have a good one. Let's touch onto the parallels of Charlayan in this.
Oh, goody.
Good idea.
Excuse me, I must have a special love for Charlayan, if I may.
So
yeah.
let's start with Bonnie, because she has words.
I have words.
Stern word.
Yes, go ahead.
I mean, you have to give me more to start on than that.
Okay, so
Ties between Charlayan and ancients.
there you go.
So we see a lot of parallels between the Charlayans and the ancients. Not just because the Charlayans have this kind of, well, it's literally called a forum, which seems to mirror the convocation in function, but also aesthetically, there's a lot of similarities between the Charlayans and Amarot. You can especially see it if you go in explorer mode through Academia Uniter. But I have, as Ayumi said, words or thoughts regarding Charlayan. I suspect that part of the reason that Charlayan has been so isolationist is that they have access to some ancient depository of knowledge. Like they could have found one of the Uniters or some unrelated ruin, or just generally like somewhere where either concepts or records were stored from that ancient period. Because we know that the Charlayans seem to know about summoning and how to do it before we start seeing, like, Izael channel Shiva or anything like that. And in Coils of Bahamut, kind of supports that with some of Louis Sua's dialogue. I can't remember the exact lines off the top of my head, but there's been various points in 1.0 and 2.0 where Louis Sua kind of implied that, oh, the Charlayans have this intimate knowledge of how summoning works, which at the end of the day, summoning is just creation magic.
Also have a bone to pick with the term summoning. And the knowledge that it is creation magic. I'm sorry, I'm gonna jump on this if that's alright.
Yeah, that's fine, go for it.
It just seems so odd to me to call it summoning because they're drawing something from beyond. I mean, the A Realm Reborn slideshow where they explain primals, bodies and stuff does go into it a bit. There's this floaty blob of red in the case of the Freed that floats back to the life stream and then is summoned back. So the creation comes in with the formation of the bodies, but they're like creating a body and inviting something in. And I just turn and look at the Convocation Zodiac and I'm like, that doesn't seem good. That seems concerning.
I mean, at this point, I kind of suspect that what we think of as the primals, we might literally be summoning the souls or the partial souls of ancients who were, experimenting.
Ramu
at
especially
Academia.
seems like a
Yeah.
strong candidate for that.
Seeing
because-
how Quetzalcoatl was brought into life, that's actually a sound theory.
Yeah,
Like,
that's what
by
I'm
summoning Quetzalcoatl.
thinking. Because, like, especially because of Quetzalcoatl, it's so suspicious. We know that an ancient seemed to give of their life synergies to summon Quetzalcoatl forth. And then where would that energy have gone, when we defeated Quetzalcoatl? I suspect that the act of channeling one of these entities is essentially briefly aligning yourself to an oversoul, essentially. Like
Sort
that's
of
the comparison that I
Shiva
would.
like.
Glances at the weapon
Yeah.
quest line.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's what I would compare it to, like the way I think it works.
Would also make sense considering if Ramu's knowledge, for example, Ramu's dialogue in.
Oh, yeah, I can
2.3.
bring that up. I actually have it up here right now. Let me scroll up a few. I have like a ton of screenshots. Okay, Ramos dialogue this is from 2.3?
3. Yeah, Defenders of Yours, yeah.
Whence sprung this calamitous seed? In the beginning, no such duality existed. Were light and dark given form when man was born? Thou standest apart from thy kin. Thou art the bringer of light, but there is something more in thee. Those were 2 lines pulled directly from right. I think it was like before or after we fought him. I think it was before.
Yeah. It's right afterwards. He actually
it
hangs.
was right
It's afterwards. He hangs around as a soul blob for a minute, talks to you, and then goes off.
There's
Yeah,
also
like
how
if you didn't tell someone that was Ramu, and like if Ramu was, side content, and you gave them those lines, they would probably assume you were being talked to by an Ascian or an Ancient.
Yeah, no, that was Ramu, which brings to point the theory that Ramu could be almost as old as Heidelin or Zodiark himself, knowing what he knows.
There's also the fact that how he greets in a sense. Thine aura betrays the servant of Heidelin, and it's like, great.
Right.
He obviously could see or recognize something, some kind of a touch there.
Yeah.
Me quoting Lakshmi's, your souls are stained.
He also has a little bit less of an interest in expanding his domain or his power relative to other primals, is something I always thought about him, was that, like, he's very content to stay with the sylphs and within his own territory relative to a lot of the other primals, which are very much all about tempering and expanding their power.
That's actually really interesting from a polarity thought. Because lightning is supposed to be the closest element to astral, right?
That's true.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And yet Ramu, if you think about it, is rather passive.
Indeed. He's kind of like an umbral lightning or something.
11 light.
11 light. Nice. So let's touch on what Bahamut asked in chat. What are the other Emmett hints other than his narrating the trailer? Bonnie, you've memorized these.
One directed right for me.
Okay, well then you guys take it away.
I imagine that a lot of us have a lot of thoughts on that particular question, so I'll let Bonnie or Meowth go first.
No, you can.
Meowth won't stop laughing, so.
I'm laughing because Bonnie is laughing.
That's incorrect, but go ahead.
Who, me?
Yes.
Okay. I have to roll up my sleeves for this one. Hints. I would say some are hints. I would say some, like Gobran said, I wouldn't call them hints. I would call them obvieties, to be fair. But for example, aside from the narration of the trailer, which I have to comment on that if you allow me, I'm kind of surprised that people that it caught off guard people, because I've been calling this ever since I think it was 5.2, and it's like only now it's starting to dawn into people to some people that that it's actually the odds are very high of happening, and I'm like, does Emmett Till has this ability to fly over people's heads to catch the fan base off guard this way? Because I can't seriously, with the obviety of some things, I can seriously grasp how people fail to see it was kind of a given. Because for one, Asim's crystal is meant to summon him, and has the power to do so. And we only used the thing once, and not knowing exactly what we were doing. And one has to wonder if the Warrior of Light, their only brain cell actually picked up on what exactly they were doing. And that's her seat of sacrifice. And not just that, but it's since the crystal is appearing at the end of 5.3 as well, that means that its purpose is not yet done. And knowing that either way, Asim's crystal is connected to, well, in this case, I should say Hades, because it's not just that it bears the summoning spell to call him, but at the same time, Asim's memories, you have to always keep in mind that it's not Asim's memories, because Asim was never allowed to make the crystal. Those are Hades' memories of Asim. So it's also probably another reason why perhaps the Warrior of Light hasn't yet been able to sift through these memories, because they're not their own. So we actually, to understand these memories, we would probably need the help of the owner of these memories. And that's even if we don't get to have Hades as in person, which I find unlikely, because I think he's going to, as he said, lend us his knowledge and strength, but this time properly, as he promised in the Crystarium. But if not, he's going to still have a very high presence in Endwalker. I don't know how, but that I would say I'm 99% sure. And yeah, well, I leave the floor to you.
Sarah, do you want to go and talk about our dear Lord of the Underworld?
I mean, I could talk about him for hours, honestly, but I would say that to answer one of Meowth's earlier points, I would imagine that a lot of that does go over the fan base's head, primarily because not everyone thinks about him as much as we do as a start, but also that a lot of people definitely internalized 5.0's ending as his arc was over. He had a satisfying conclusion. He doesn't necessarily have to come back in any capacity. And that for a long time, I think a lot of us kind of accepted that, and we're kind of like, well, if he was to come back later, that would just be icing on the cake, not an inevitability, and we wouldn't want to really like get our hopes up if that were to make sense. Now it feels a lot more important, especially since 5.3, that he come back, and his narration within the teaser trailer just kind of continues that line of build up. But I also like to think of little details like Y'shtola at the end of 5.4 saying stuff about our friend Emperor Solus. And like we're wondering what he would think of all of the situations that we have arrayed in front of us that we have to now deal with, and how, like, what his potential thought process would be of how to fix the problem in front of us. We might actually get to ask him.
And as far as like the hints of him returning, one of the biggest ones is actually in 5.0, but for the sake of being chronological, we'll go back to the end of Stormblood, where they sure put a hell of a lot of our words. Holy shit!
Yeah, there's a lot
Focus.
in Stormblood. If you guys haven't been paying attention, replay Stormblood and pay attention to
I
the
replayed
dialogue.
it recently and paid attention, and it is just loaded with stuff that foreshadows where we're at now. It's uncanny.
Yeah. You guys may diss it as like
especially the steps and the mole, as like you want to be talking to the Katoon every chance you get when a patch drops.
Guys may think of it as like a lame like filler expansion or whatever. There's a lot. I know a lot of you do, but It's jumped up a little bit on my respected expansion list thanks to revisiting it after what we know
Yeah.
now.
Absolutely.
But, sorry, Bonnie, go ahead.
Yeah, so they put a lot of focus on the Solace clone factory. That has to be going somewhere, like, with how big of a deal they made it. Like, not necessarily even him coming back to use one of the clones, even though I think that's a high possibility, but if Fandaniel really wanted to trigger the fuck out of the Scions and the Warrior of Light, if he got his hands on the clone factory and like maimed the corpses or displayed them on pikes throughout El Sabard or any of the places my brain goes.
No, I mean,
or even puppeted one around, like parroted it at us, like, "Oh, look at me, I'm Emmett Self."
Yeah, exactly.
I could see him doing that.
Exactly, like it seems so on brand. But there's that. There's the focus on the clones, and then in 5.0 itself, we didn't quote unquote kill him correctly. You're supposed to trap the Asian soul in the white auracite and then shatter the auracite. He broke the auracite before we finished charging our Kamehameha. So sure, we pierced him and did damage, but we didn't basically sunder him because that's kind of what it seems to be metaphysically we're doing.
Broken out well before that.
Yeah.
That was the first clue I found. I was making a lame old video.
You went back to the Bahamas.
Watched that scene over and over again, trying to get the precise moments I was clipping together for this music. And I was just looking at it, and I'm like, he shatters it. There's several seconds that happen before the actually manifests. It's pretty dramatic if you go back and look at it.
Yeah, like, that was one of the biggest hints that I saw. I was like, okay, this didn't go down the way we know it's supposed to. And that right there was a huge hint for me. I was still being, like, reserved because I didn't want to get my hopes up.
Exactly.
But I kept that in the back of my mind. I was like, okay, this is suspicious. And then going forward, I missed the shoe bill in 5.1. But I did see the shoe bill in 5.2, and I was like, wait a minute. I know what dungeon you come from, and I know what the fan theories are about you, Mr. Shoebill. How dare you? And then, looking through the short stories, we see he has this intimate knowledge of the Underworld, or the life stream, as the modern races call it. And then we get the White Day short story, and Hythlodius calls him the Lord of the Underworld, and I'm like, okay, that's a little suspicious. They're leaning into that pretty hard. And then we get to 5.3, and there's the whole thing with Hythlodius and getting our crystals, and I'm like, okay. And I'm like still being like really wary, and then Seed of Sacrifice happens, and I'm like, oh, I see. And then it actually was a couple weeks before I saw that the shoe bill had moved to the pendants, and I may have screamed in Discord when I saw that, because I was like, wait a minute, that's not my minion.
I remember when I finished SOS the first time, and I was really like sad because he had disappeared again, and I had like really started to get the feels, and then I go into the pendants room that evening, and I'm like, oh no.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Good way to put it.
And it was like, that was almost like the straw at the very end that broke the camel's back for me, was that fucking shoe bill.
You guys have all these like weird stories about going in and seeing the shoe bill, and I go in, I see the shoe bill, I'm like, I hope you didn't shit in my sandwiches.
See, for me, when I first found the shoe bill, it was standing on the that little fence outside the window because of the time of day I went in. So I was going in there to go use my glamour dresser, and I walk in, and like I got distracted by Discord for a second, and then I tab back in, and I'm like, how'd my shoe bill get? Wait.
It's especially funny if you have both your shoe bill and that shoe bill out in the same room at the same time.
Shoe billception. No, but as a matter of fact, I would like to point out when Hades appears in Seat of Sacrifice 1, his second Tale of the Shadows kind of confirms that it was him and not a shade nor a memory. That because these theories have been kind of around. I've seen them. I've seen people in the forums and stuff saying, "No, it's just a memory that Emmett Selk left." No. That's Hades. That's the proper way, because also no red mask as an ancient. That means he's stepped down his title of Emmett Selk. That means he's just Hades, the Lord of the Underworld, and. And then there's this thing that when he appears as an ancient, and also we see that he's no longer Sith-Lord. So I would venture that he's still convalescent, but he still seems to be healing after the axe of light to the gut. What do you think?
I mean,
he needs
he'll
many
probably
naps.
heal after that too. He's probably hungry.
I'll cook for him.
Absolutely.
Bonk.
How am I getting bonked for that?
I guess you're gonna need to bonk me too.
Double bonk.
Yeah.
My only love is Hilda, so I'll fight anyone who thinks otherwise.
We really need to find you a glam for your ninja that's just 2 bonk sticks instead of daggers.
Why would I hit people with sticks if I'm a ninja?
Because bonk.
I mean, you can find a machine to do that for you.
But related to what we were talking about. Okay. I see.
It's the
I
slow
see
eventual.
I see my point wasn't needed. Moving on. No, in all seriousness. When I think it was a Yumi who asked, right? About the transition between. Oh, good God, no! I was about to say 6.5. No, between 5.5 and 6.0.
Yes.
Sorry. I actually expect because now, I mean, there's been no White Day shorts this year, and that's rather suspicious. As I say, it's just that they're basically holding under major wraps anything related to Hades. But if you recall, after the teaser was released, they kind of spilled the tea. And right after that, there was the Science and Sinners merchandise and the shirts and stuff featuring actually Hades. And up until then, we had hardly anything official coming from, well, the one who kicked many classic characters in the popularity polls down the stairs. So still, I think they're still keeping stuff under many wraps, and I can see not 5. I can see 5.5 transitioning onto 5.50, having, for example, someone speak in our minds, maybe in ancient. What do you think?
I mean, we speak to ourselves a lot. Ardbert's there.
Mm-hmm. We could literally be talking to Ardbert even.
Yeah.
So now I'm just imagining Ardbert and Hades arguing in our heads while we're trying to have
Arbert's got a sippy cup,
Scions.
just kind of looking over like, what you got in your cup?
Hades dangles his sunglasses down. It's like, I got a mimosa.
Damn, son, I'm only drinking apple juice.
At this point, the Warrior of Light, they will say, "No, I hear 2 voices in my head. That's a schizophrenia."
Oh God. No, it'd be
Smoothie,
3
yes.
because we're probably gonna start hearing Hydaelyn again here soon. I'd be really surprised if we didn't. And then
And we
I'm
may
kind of
hear
expecting we might start
Zodiac.
hearing Zodiac. Yeah, exactly. So we might
I
have
wanna
like 3 or
start-
4 voices going.
Yeah, I want to start hearing Zodiac talking and like get his side of the thing now,
Yes.
unblemished by Elidibus's position.
Yes.
Plot twist: the reason we try to go and get untempered is because the Warrior of Light just gets really tired of all of the arguments going on in their head.
So you made me think something interesting. Prior to Seed of Sacrifice, I had assumed Elidibus was, or not Elidibus, I'm sorry. Ardbert wasn't really able to do much because he'd rejoined with us. But he straight up talks to us there.
Yep.
Which I was, that's really cool.
Projects himself too.
Probably not this, but what if someone else was talking and using his voice just so that we wouldn't know he's still around?
I mean, that definitely seems like a technique that Square would use for something like that.
The bit where we go and see Seto kind of implies to me that that's not the case, but it was an interesting thought anyway.
Well, they can change voices if they want. Elidibus can freely change between Adbert's voice and his voice.
Very well. Let us forego this pretense.
Exactly.
Just like that.
Yeah. So yeah.
I'm really hoping, honestly, that we just have some huge blow up in 5.55 and Warrior of Light ends up alone for the start of Endwalker. Really.
So
We're not even-
I
we're
would like
not
to.
even-
We have Alphino and Alize with us in the trailer, so it can't be a complete break, I would think. But
I would
there
like
might
to touch
be
on
a
a theory
break.
too. There.
I would be fine.
So there's another theory that we had going around where, actually, one of our other streamer friends, Soldier First Class, brought this theory to me too. That during the meeting that we're going to have with the alliance leaders and everyone, you'd see that there is 2 or 3 people that are noticeably absent. Yugiri, Hien, and Ishtola. Now, normally during the game, when we meet at a meeting table or a banquet or any other kind of event, things don't go as planned. So
Somebody dies, somebody gets their arm cut off, somebody falls
somebody
over
gets
unconscious.
yeeted to another plane of existence.
Honestly, it's shocking that the Warrior of Light even goes to these things anymore.
We should just stop.
Boycott them.
Anyways, so what is the best way for us to be alone without allies, becoming isolated, losing
Kill
all of
them.
our? Well, one thing is what we see with Gaia and Reen and Metron is that Metron forced Gaia's glyph out, marking her as an Asian and creating kind of that suspicion. Why can't Van Daniel do the same to us, and then the leaders see us as an Asian and think, well, we've just been being used all this time. I don't trust you anymore. That's just a thought. It's a theory. It's a game theory.
Nice quote.
I
Thanks.
mean, it could be, but it would require for Van Daniel to know who we are, and that's another
Well,
story.
the
because
thing is, like,
technically-
he said that I'm different, you see, from the ancients who clung to dear life, referencing, of course, the Unsundered, and from you, outing us as an individual. So it's not like I'm different from all of the ancients, but he also mentioned us. So
I'm kind of 2 minds on the matter. I do like the idea of Van Daniel popping our glyph and being like, ha 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 ha! But
I'm surprised he didn't already do it in 5.4 when we were all there with everybody and they would have been so
Yeah.
shocked. Like, holy shit.
Though, to be fair, if he did it at the meeting, then there'd be more of the Alliance leaders present to see it firsthand instead of just Rabon, Lise, and their guards.
Oh, and then everybody thinks that we're Asian or an Asian puppet.
Yeah. Though the other thought I've had kind of ties back into all the talk Meowth and I have done regarding the possibility of Hades talking in our head through the Asm crystal. I can kind of see if we start regaining Asm memories or if we have actually been ascended to our seat. Like, there's a couple ways it could happen, but I could see us either accidentally turning it on if we get pissed off or emotional or something at a meeting. Like, I would imagine there's probably some, part of the Warrior of Light that you could just poke, and then it'd be just like, yeah, no,
Pop.
glyph. But on the other hand, I can also kind of see, like, if Hades gets really, really annoyed with people's stupidity, I can
As if
see him
that
just
hasn't already
being
happened.
like, no, listen here, and just pops our glyph and is just like, you are going to tell them word for word exactly what I say, and you're going to like it.
I'll be all right with that.
I have a
There
lot of
she goes.
theories as well. Oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
A lot of my theories make me think very much the opposite of this. And again, all of this is built upon like toothpicks all balanced together. If any of these other things are wrong, then we'll default back to, oh, I can't wait till I see our glyph. I think that the glyphs may possibly be a sign of the corruption that the Asians underwent. I don't think they're supposed to be red at the very least. If you look in academia, if you go through the Academia Annotator, you'll see that the glyphs of Helmut and Mitrin and La Habrea are there. La Habrea's is purple, very similar purple to Lunar Bahamut, incidentally. But the other two are gold. Azim's invocation on the floor of Seat of Sacrifice was also gold. I want to see us pop a gold glyph, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, the corruption thing is interesting because I can definitely see the red glyphs being a sign of corruption.
And what Heidelin says, wear the bearer of the red brand, or whatever exactly.
Well,
Yeah, the crimson brand.
The crimson brand, yes.
Well,
Like that
I would
seems to
like-
imply something there to me.
Yeah, especially because they use the word brand. Like,
Mhm.
you're branding livestock or whatever, how you want to put it. Which, I mean, I still kind of that ours would also be corrupted if the red is corrupted. Ours probably wouldn't be red, probably be Heidelin blue or some crap like that.
That reminds me, if you invert the color of the red, it does turn to a very Heidelin blue.
Yeah.
yes.
That's another strong possibility in my mind.
But then we have to consider too that red in ancient may imply, which of course Shadowbringers was all about turning what we believed was evil and what not was turning everything around. And just like the lizards in the Asim Step, that they believe crimson to be the color of freedom, there's also the ancients marking, in a sense, their highest, their leaders with this color in their masks. So one has to wonder exactly what red means, and if it's actually truly corruption, or it's just a color of that implies being on a higher status. It's kind of right now we don't actually know much about the ancients and their culture, even though we had the whole thing of Amaranth. So
yeah, well, it's interesting you say that, because the thing I was thinking of is that red is the color of of some of the Terminus beasts, the color of the final days, the fire, and the one big Terminus beast that we're shown in the trailer is a reddish color.
Now I'm wondering
Yes.
what the peoples of the steppe would do if they saw the red light coming out of the tower. Would they think it's something good if they think that red is the color of freedom? Because that seems like it could go very, very poorly.
Yes, I mean, it's like golden. When the Warrior of Light uses golden to summon, it's a good thing. But when we see the golden light pouring from the sky in Shadowbringers, how be honest, how much time did you endure the everlasting light until you came to hate it with all your being?
Right.
I mean, I did all of Shadowbringers in 3 days, and I still hate the everlasting light.
I just don't like it because I'm sensitive to light.
Yeah, that really doesn't help. I played all of Shadowbringers with Flux turned on to get rid of blue light on my screen. So the sky was like extra golden orange.
Immediate thought upon entering the first time was basically, where is the light switch?
Yes.
Turns out I
mean,
wasn't.
Switch. Hey.
So I think we should pretty much wrap it up. I think that's pretty much summarizes our theories, our overview of the 8th Umbral Calamity. We're gonna go ahead and throw out another poll next week to see what you guys want us to hear, what else do you guys want us to talk about. So I look forward to that as well. We're obviously going to be streaming at the same time next week, 3 p.m. Central Time, 4 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. GMT. Our links are below in the chat if you'd like to join us on the Discord, or if you'd like to check us out on our social media at our Twitter. Each of us have our own individual Twitters as well. You can always join the Loreline. You can also check out the Loreline's YouTube for all of our VODs in case you did miss this show or come in later. My Twitter, personally, myself, is BG_SCIZOR, like the Pokemon. Neela, go ahead and ring off yours.
Well, it's Neela Nurodo. Let me spell that because it's not easy to spell. You'll find it at NEILA_NURUODO.
Core?
Sorry, I was laughing at the cats.
That's okay.
I love cats. My personal Twitter is at Core Healer, all one word, capital C. Hello, kitty.
All right, Kat. I think it's speaking for you.
The cat is telling us their Twitter.
Yep. If
That's
you're just
right.
gonna let it continue, I'm going
That's
to Bonnie.
right, kitty. Emmett Selk is coming to see us in 6.0, kitty. I know, I'm excited too.
Seems unimpressed.
Plot twist.
Bonnie,
the
go.
kitty is
Bonnie, go.
He
before
does
this
seem
gets
like a
out of
cat
hand.
person.
My Twitter is at Bonnie_L_Price. No meows though, contrary to here.
Shadow, Meow, you want to go?
I have two. I have my main account, both Spanish and English. That's Meow the Story, and there's my only English account. That's X Shadow Meow, as you see in my nickname. Yeah, you can follow me in both. I'm active in both of them. I don't mind which one you prefer.
And with that wraps up today's stream. Thanks for coming out, you guys. We will catch you guys next week for another episode of Lorelines. So have a great weekend, y'all.
Take care, everyone. Meow.
Meow.
And we'll always love it if you ask us questions.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And